G'day and welcome back. It's Peter Bender on the Bundaberg Commercial YouTube channel. No, you don't need to adjust your microphone or your voice piece or earpiece, whatever you're looking at. I've actually just come over the back end of the flu, so you get to listen to my melodic voice this week, and hopefully if we speak clearly enough, the volume will be fine. My apologies otherwise. We're in a mini-series right now where we're talking about sales techniques and sales skills that you may encounter as you not only buy commercial properties, but anything in general in life, ranging from your normal common store to anything for a vehicle, anything through to holidays. The whole gamut of sales is covered with it. Last week we spoke about a particular sales structure, which I have up the back, and I call that a classical sales structure. It was a technique that was taught to people from about the 1950s to about the 1990s. It revolved around the fact that salespeople needed to have more understanding on product knowledge, so they were given a structure in their training technique to be able to handle that. And it worked fine for a good period of time, until about the 1980s to 1990s. So what happened in those years, particularly for those who may not have even been born at that stage? We have to recognise that. In the 1990s, I remember we got excited because the internet came online, and we were very happy because we could pay $50 a month and we got 5 megabytes of data. 5 megabytes, like that doesn't do anything now. You can't even sign in for 5 meg worth of data. But that was the aspect of it. But it was a precursor to what was happening in the world. People started to get more connected. People started to realize that there was more to life than was just in their own backyard. They took more interest in international affairs, what was going on, aspects of the great media personalities became much more famous. There's a lot more sports sort of represented around the world. You could see a lot more from your home TV that you weren't able to before. There's a lot of interconnectivity that came through there. Also in the sales area, there was the aspect of there was a lot of salespeople, and there still is a lot of salespeople now. If you go into like your local shopping centre, every shop will have salespeople, whether it's a coffee shop, whether it's a food retailer, whether it's a department store, whether it's a jeweler, whether it's a tobacconist. Every shop has salespeople of some sort. There's just hundreds and thousands of salespeople in any particular town or suburb. Now, as with everything in life, and I'll maybe use sport as an analogy, when you have a lot of players in a sport, you will find that some will just get better at what they do than others. There's going to be some that stand out. And in the 80s and 90s, it got to the stage where people who were really good salespeople started to evolve their skills a little bit more, and they were constantly looking to develop themselves, just like any other industry, to see if they can do better, see if they can be better, see if they can help people better. And they got to the stage where they realized that the sales structure behind doesn't actually suit what they wanted to do. The good salespeople started to recognize that they were problem solvers. And there's even got to the stage where some were classed as closers. Now, a closer is a slightly different category of sales. It's where timeshare was a particular indication of it. In timeshare, a guest would come in and there'd be a salesperson who would show them through the premises, open the windows and show the fantastic views, show the facilities of the complex. And then if there was sufficient interest in the buyer, the closer would come in. You also see it in car dealerships sometimes, particularly if you've got a young salesperson. They'll do the product material, explain the details of the functions of the car, and then they may go and get a senior sales manager or a sales rep who will come in and close the deal. Another thing that was changing in the 80s and 90s is contracts were getting bigger and more complicated. And it wasn't just product knowledge. that was making the complexity. There's a lot of legality and stuff. There's big contracts that had tenders. There were government contracts. There were international contracts. It was no longer viable for one salesperson or one negotiator to be able to go in and be the front for the company and get the contract. It got very much more into stages of needing teams. 2 or 3 people or negotiators. It was a team of negotiators. There may be a lawyer, there may be an accountant, there may be a couple of marketing people, and there may be a couple of specialist salespeople. But it's very much got into teams and dynamics. Once again, that didn't lend itself to the classical sales process. The probably tipping point that really created the need for change in the way that people sold came about from a couple of big disastrous sales in instances where it just didn't work. And we're talking about particularly military conflicts. We had like the Korean War, we had the Vietnam War, we had Afghanistan twice, those sort of type aspects. You had East Timor. All of these military confrontations in the Middle East as well, all these military confrontations were unmitigated disasters. It makes no difference what side of the fence you're on. Both sides lost a lot of people, a lot of men and women were killed, a lot of children were killed, properties were demolished, entire cities were razed to the ground. It was not a success in any standard. And people started to realize that we needed a better way to communicate, a better way to negotiate. So in that environment, in about 1981, it was actually the Harvard Business School that came forward with a really good, successful model. And they actually made it available to everybody in a book called Getting to Yes. And what they looked at is 4 particular elements on how they changed the sales process. And it fits into the model behind, and I'll go into a bit of example on that later on for you. And they used this in examples of undersea water mining. So in international waters, there's a whole different realm of what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. It's pretty much international. It was carte blanche. So what they had worked out is they got some teams together and they worked out some arrangements and deals with the nationalities who were looking to mine undersea. It was a whole different concept. The things that they looked at, there was 4 particular elements that they wanted to change and were proposing as being, the next wave forward in sales training and sales development and negotiation. The first thing they looked at is recognizing that people were not the problem. Now, you've probably experienced in sales when a sales rep who's not highly skilled suddenly gets flustered and may get assertive, even bullying to the stage where they want you to sign the contract or say yes to this or force you to go down a path that you don't want to go. And that's because salespeople were trained to push, to shove, to roll, to make the deal, to get the contract through. A Harvard model went along the sign as saying, people are not the problem. The problem is the problem. So it wasn't a case of, if Peter doesn't want to buy that car, it's not a matter of changing Peter. It's a matter of, okay, well, how do we make the car more appealing to Peter? So the people were no longer the problem. That was the first element that they looked at. They put the fact that we need to be working as a team, very much going into that negotiation type phase, rather than, who's the dominant player. The second thing they looked at is they wanted to talk about interests rather than positions. So it wasn't too much the fact that you may be a president of a company. It was more about, okay, what is it that the values of the company are? It wasn't the fact that you may be a military leader. It may be the fact of, okay, well, what are the constraints and limitations that you have in your role? What guidelines have your president given you in that aspect? And these type skills and negotiations, whilst Harvard worked from an international point of view, it rolled out quickly into the business arena. It rolled into anything like employee negotiations, anything like union negotiations, anything like territory matches of countries working on borders. All those sort of aspects came in, and they started to look at what were the interests rather than the positions of the people, and what was their point. If someone says, look, I'm not going to do this unless I have that, that's fine. They took that, they understood that was a position, but they wanted to work out, and what is it that's got you to the stage where you feel you need to have that? The reason they went on working on interests rather than positions is because it then gives them the opportunity to find a variety of options. And this is the third element. The third element is looking at a variety of options for the solution. Now, in last week's model, we talked about presentation, and we talked about how the old model was you looked for 3 things that a customer wanted, and if you're able to identify and satisfy those 3 needs, that was enough for you to go into a presentation and try and close it. The Harvard model was different in that it would look at 3 different options. So you may be going to buy a house, okay? Well, they may give you an option for a house, an option for a unit, an option for a caravan. You know, if the fact is that you want shelter and you want to be warm and you want to have a bathroom, well, all 3 of those options will suit for you. And it was all a matter of working out which variety of options. One of the things that changed the vernacular of sales speak is providing options really got people to understand that they were problem solvers. And we had terms like, I remember my boss first told me, he says, Peter, you get paid according to the size of the problems you solve. And it took me a fair while to understand what he meant by that. And in commercial real estate, I have a much better appreciation of what he says. If you are a salesperson in a news agency, you will get paid a certain wage for according to the retail industry, and the problems you solve tend to be fairly small. It might be what type of newspaper they're looking for, what type of stationery they're looking for. They're not big issues. You're not going to get a big amount of money for that aspect. Not being degrading, it's just a fact of life. When you look at perhaps selling a vehicle for somebody, you're suddenly looking at anything between $35,000 to $250,000. So the problem the customer has suddenly is a lot dearer, and consequently, the salesperson will be paid more to solve that problem than they would be if they're in the news agency. Likewise, the car person isn't going to get paid the same if they worked at the news agency. Likewise, the news agency person isn't going to get paid the same as what they're currently doing if they were solving a $250,000 to buy a new Ram Dodge. It's the same in commercial real estate. And I quite often get people saying, oh, Peter, you get paid so much money. It's just absurd. You shouldn't be getting paid that much. But whether it's right or wrong, people have to recognize that I don't get paid an hourly rate. I only get paid on success. And what you have is the problems I solve are in the multiple millions of dollars. And I explain to people that the price I charge is what I charge to make you a millionaire. And they pretty well understand that once you get the frame of reference. Not all of them are happy. Not all of them enjoy me. And that's fine. I'm comfortable with that. But the concept is we started talking in terms of getting paid according to the size of the problems you solve. And that was a big aspect of becoming a problem solver. The last element, the fourth element of the Harvard business model, was agreeing based on objective criteria. So they would have a look at the options that were put forward to the table that may have been generated through both parties, the buyers and sellers, or 2 different countries, and then they would have work out a criteria very similar to how traditional recruitment is done at an interview. You may have set questions and you may have a set rating scale. Well, this is similar to how they worked at negotiations. Before they evaluated the criteria of the options, they'd say, okay, well, what's most important? What are the must-haves? What are the nice-to-haves? And what are the, be pleasant to have if you can have those as well on that bracket. I think one of the interesting stories that they put through in Getting to Yes, that book, is the Middle East conflict at that time. Now, it's an appropriate time right now. There's a whole lot of warfare going over in the Middle East, as unfortunately happens at times. And there was border conflicts in the early 80s, I think it was. And it was essentially Israel and I think Palestine were flush up against a particular border, and they were throwing grenades and shooting each other and shooting across the border, and they were looking for a peacekeeping deal. And the Harvard Business School sent a team of negotiators over there to see what they could organise and run with. And they had a look at, recognising that people weren't the problem, because these people weren't getting on because of religious differences, millennium of fights and territorial disputes. So, there was a case that it wasn't the people that were the issue, it was the fact that this is a very problematic area. So we needed to tackle the problem. They had a look at the interests of the people rather than the positions. So they didn't mind if they were looking at the leader of the PLO, or if they're looking at the president of the Prime Minister of Israel. It was very much, what do they need to satisfy the needs for their country? Because we're talking about some big issues. And they looked at various options. And what it really worked out is both sides actually wanted the same thing. They just wanted security and space and to be left alone. These are common things that everybody wants to have a look at. And the resolution that they came up with the new option is they made a demarcation zone similar to what they have between North and South Korea, but it was quite radical at that time. So Israel actually gave up some territory. I think it was about 250 meters or something like that. It's just enough distance, and it was a non-settled area, and it just took the heat out of the environment, because sometimes, like a pair of angry dogs, the closer they are, the more they fight. You put them apart, you get to a certain distance, they're just going to have their own territory, and they're quite comfortable to run with. And that was one of the examples that they used on how they used that particular model to go through. If we look back at the model that we used last week, and I'll grab a magic pen. If we looked at where the getting to yes model fits in, because the Harvard model didn't replace this, it maybe reinforced some particular areas. So the issue of people versus problem, that comes in here. So I just put GTY for getting to yes. That's pretty clever off the top of my head, if I do say so myself. Then they looked at the presentation. Well, that's definitely where they look at the variety of options. So that is another area that they have strengthened in there. The interests rather than positions. That comes in the fact finding. That was a very key area of that. In order to get the results that they wanted and the options they wanted, they needed to really understand people's interests rather than their positions, and that is very much the strength of fact-finding. We spoke last week that fact-finding is the most important element of the traditional sales model, because if you can do that correct, everything else will fall into place. If you've got the wrong assumptions and wrong facts, then you're not going to get what you need. And then you have an agreement based on objectives. That would be agreements, that's probably about down here. So you can see the Harvard business model still fits in the traditional sales model. So you will find a lot of similarities in there. But what you'll find is not everybody uses the Harvard business model. I have been lucky to have gone through several iterations of sales training and sales management and sales leadership upon different models, depending on the particular industries that I'm at and the particular client bases that I work in. By being able to do that, I've been able to use the Harvard business model. Now, the final bit of this video is I want to share with you some tips. If you find someone who's a tough negotiator, odds are they have probably had experience in the Harvard business model. I remember coming across the first time of finding someone who was using the Harvard business model. I can't remember what the actual product was, but it was the discussion was similar to, okay, so you want your buyer wants $10,000, your seller wants $10,000 for this. I'll give you 8. And they said, oh, thank you for your offer, Peter, but we'll take 10. I was like, oh, That's a bit hard, a bit harsh, very unsporting. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 9. This is, with respect, Peter, we will still stay on 10. It was then that I realised that the rules had changed. This was very unusual. People were not in a stage of being very firm on price. So one of the elements of the Harvard business model is they took a lot of the emotion out of the equation. It was very much all about particular criteria. So one of the things that will indicate to you that you may have someone who's more superior as a salesperson than someone who uses the standard model is if they look fairly firm on price. There are ways to work around that, and that's not the place of this particular video, but it's here to let you know that you've got someone. If you find someone is using the Harvard model, be somewhat happy, because they should be fairly calm. That's another indicator that you look at. If you've got a salesperson who's all excited and wants you to go and do it now, sign now. Yeah, if you don't do it, I'll get the 5 players out the backyard who are looking to come in and take it straight away. Odds are that is not a Harvard business model trainee. They were probably using the old model if they got any training at all. If you've got someone who's pretty calm and listens to you and asks the questions and bounces options to you, then these are good things for you, because quite often we are not the expert in the sales environment. And that's one of the challenges that people have. They get a little bit nervous if they go and buy their first commercial property. They're going against a salesperson who's probably been doing this for quite a while, has hundreds of deals underneath their belt. They understand the realm quite well. And as a buyer, you feel nervous and you get a little bit worried that you're going to be had. If you've got someone who's going through giving you options and letting you make decisions and is looking at talking about pricing on valid criteria such as benchmarks, such as turnover figures, such as comparative analysis, be comfortable with it. These are good things for you to work with. If you've got someone who's not giving you options and not giving you valid criteria for defending their price, then that's an indication that you haven't got a good salesperson, even if they are using a Harvard business model. So those are things to have a look at, how flexible they are with pricing, and how they're going about your interests in understanding your needs, and how they are coming up with options for you. If they're doing those sort of things, you've probably got a good mix. Now, as with everything in life, life is not a fairy tale. There did in time become a few cracks in the Harvard business model. Not everything worked. And next week, we're going to talk about how negotiation changed and the new phase that's come through, probably from about 5 years ago, and starting to get a lot of traction now. And we'll talk about that. So hopefully my voice will be back and we'll enjoy it. But in the meantime, take care and God bless.